Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. If I ever have a choice, I will usually pick an own root rose over a grafted rose. That's for personal reasons around their longevity and health and the lack of suckering on own root roses. That all said, that's my bias, and there are very good reasons why you should consider growing grafted roses. I want to go through 5 of those reasons in this video today. Before I get going on those 5 reasons, I probably need to give you a brief recap on the difference between own root and grafted. I'm not going to go deeply into it because I've done that in another video, and if you want the full story, you can go there. Suffice to say for this video that what they've done is they've surgically connected, let's say, one variety to another, conjoined 2 different roses in such a way that the top stalk, the part that's growing above the ground, is from one variety and it's genetically has the flowers and has the growth characteristics that you want to see above the ground, and that the variety below ground is the rootstock, usually a more vigorous or disease-resistant variety. And the idea is that you can confer the growing characteristics of the rootstock onto the top stalk. They're joined at a place called the graft union. There are advantages and disadvantages to both grafted and own root roses, which will become apparent as we go into this discussion, but that's the basics just so you can understand the terminology that I'm using. The number one reason why you should consider growing grafted roses, and it's the same reason why I still buy in a lot of my roses grafted, is about availability. This is a completely pragmatic consideration. Perfect world, you'd be able to go on the website and find that they offer both the own root and the grafted side by side, and you'd be able to take your pick. That's not the way of the real world. Grafting has been the predominant production system over the last century, and many producers still produce their roses only by grafted. Not to mention that many of the breeders and the breeding companies of roses really just offer the fanciest, newest varieties of roses as grafted first, because it's the fastest, easiest way to get it to market in large quantities. So if you decide I only want own root roses because you want the benefits of, either health or longevity, or you don't want those rootstock suckers in your garden, well, that's all wonderful, but you'll be restricting your palette of roses by more than half as it currently is in the world today. So number one reason, because you want the full selection of roses. Number 2 reason to consider is the growing qualities of the rootstock. Now, I have to say, my personal experience with own root has been it grows well here, and it grows well for 95% of the varieties that I've tried. However, there are growers, gardeners, and rosarians all across North America who have their own experiences with rootstocks, and some of them will absolutely swear by one rootstock or another as the way to grow in their climate. There are basically 3 commercially available rootstocks right now. If you see that the website offers no information on which rootstock it is, you can probably assume that it's Dr. Huey. If it's grown in California, it probably is Dr. Huey. There is an advantage to that rootstock, they say, that it is better performing in alkaline soil. Most roses have a little bit of trouble with iron uptake when they're in an alkaline soil, and so Dr. Huey does a better job of that than many other varieties of roses. So if you are in an area with alkaline soil and you've talked to other rose growers and you find that they've done well with Dr. Huey grafted varieties, it might be worth a try. Second rootstock variety, Multiflora. I hear people say that this is wonderful in cooler climates or climates with a shorter summer. So let's say northern climates, Multiflora may be your choice. And of course, down in the southeast, Florida, and climates like that with a sandy soil, there's the shallow-rooted Rosa Fortuniana, which does better in that climate and apparently resists well some of the root nematodes that are prevalent in those areas. So that would be the second reason. I mean, obviously, grafting was done for a reason. The idea was to try to impart some of the extra vigor from that rootstock up into the top stalk of the roses. And typically, I will say this, that many grafted roses do perform quicker and faster and take that vigor faster than own root roses. So if you're looking for the vigor of the rootstock, and if you're looking for specific qualities of a rootstock that other growers have said works well in your area, then you should be looking for that grafted rose. Sadly, unfortunately, many suppliers don't declare which rootstock they're using. I'll put up a quick list of 2 or 3 that I think use Fortuniana. The other one is Palatine Roses, which uses the Multiflora rootstock. Those are the ones that I know of that use something other than Dr. Huey. Everything else, If they list it on their website, that's fantastic, but otherwise you may have to do a little bit of calling or investigation to see what they actually use. Number 3 reason to consider grafted roses, it has to do with tree roses or standard roses. If you're not familiar with these are the types of roses that you'd see on a stick almost, or a long stem, and then they have their blooms and all of their top growth right at the top. Kind of looks like a lollipop. I'll throw in a quick diagram here to show how they're grafted, but oftentimes they have a rootstock, they have a stem stock, and then they have the top stock variety or varieties. And that's the next thing I was going to mention, is they can actually be multi-grafted, meaning one side or 1/3 of it can be one color, then they can graft on a second and a third color as well. So you can get a multicolor display on your roses. I see no reason why an amateur couldn't do this on a shrub rose as well, is graft on additional varieties to get more color into the same space on the same rose. So that's kind of a neat project, and it's not something you can do own root, it's a grafting technique. For number 4, I'm going to have to go back to the diagrams here and talk about suckering roses. Okay, so typically we talk about rootstock suckers being a problem. I'm going to go back to the grafted rose here and say that you have the top stock that is one variety, you have the rootstock that is another variety, and sometimes you'll have a section of that rootstock come out and try to form its own roots and put up its own stems and try to take over the top stock. So this is the typical problem you would see described about grafted varieties. However, I'm going to show you a different diagram here and say that for certain varieties of roses, and particularly I'm going to talk about the Gallica roses, some species roses, and the rugosa roses, they do suckering all on their own roots. They don't have to be grafted to take on this thing of sending shoots down below and runnering long distances in the garden. I've done a video on this where you see Charles DeMills has run 6 or 8 or 10 feet in my garden. So some of these older Gallica varieties can be a little bit bullies that way and start pushing their crown out much further. Strangely enough, we talk about grafting as the problem when it comes to suckering. In this case, grafting might be the solution. So imagine a solution where you've taken that Gallica variety and you've grafted it onto a rootstock, and you leave that graft union above the ground when you plant it, meaning that there's no way for the Gallica variety to take on its nasty habit of sending out those long suckers throughout the garden. The 5th and final reason is for those roses that don't grow well on their own roots. And you'd think, well, that's a funny defect for a breeder to let slip through, that a rose is just weak or doesn't grow well on its own root system. But keeping in mind that that's not what they were evaluating for at the time. For a long time, the assumption was that every rose would be grown grafted. And so when they evaluated it, they would graft up a whole bunch of them, put them in trial fields, and if it had interesting flowers and good garden qualities on the grafted variety or as a grafted product, then it passed the test and it could go to market. But there are a bunch of roses that I've tried here that I've taken the cuttings from and put them on their own roots, and they just don't do well. One example of that would be Griffith Buck's excellent grandiflora rose called Distant Drums. Beautiful color, but just does not root well and does not perform well on its own roots, at least in my climate. And that's something that you may find in your own climate as well, is that if you've tried something as an own root and it just fails in your climate or in your soil, you may have the recourse of trying it as a grafted rose and see how it does then. All right, those are the 5 reasons why you should at least consider having grafted roses in your garden. I'm still choosing own root wherever I get that choice, and I tend to think of that graft union on the grafted roses, that spot where you have the rootstock below and the top stalk up above. That graft union is a vulnerable point in that rose, and in fact oftentimes when you see health problems on grafted roses, a gall, a crown gall, or a canker developing, it's usually in that graft union. It tends to swell over time and develop lots of scar tissue, and for that reason often you'll find that grafted roses are shorter lived in the garden, on average 10, 12, 15 years, which is a long time I guess in garden terms, but compared to own root roses, there are known specimens of roses in Europe that are on their own roots that have been growing on a castle wall for 800 years. So that's a difference in lifespan. I want to link below the video an article by Pamela Greenwald, who's an organic grower out of Florida. She does not use Fortuniana rootstock, which I guess is against common wisdom down there. They say you have to have Fortuniana rootstock. She grows without it and grows healthy roses and has thrived in that climate. And she gives some other really good good points as to why she prefers own root over grafted. Don't want to preach on the point, but I did want to give you sort of a balanced point of view here. There are reasons why you'd want to choose grafted, but I'm still going to stick with my choice as own root. One thing that I do here is that if I'm permitted to do so by law, I will get that grafted rose, I'll buy that grafted rose, and then I will take cuttings and root them, and I'll grow them side by side. And typically within a couple of years, you'll see that the own root rose has caught right up with the grafted rose in terms of garden performance, and then sometimes exceeds it as well. So that's my way of getting around the fact that I have to buy many of my roses grafted. All right, thanks for watching today. If you have any comments about that hot topic within roses, drop it down below in the comments of the video. We'll see what we can do to help.